Her sister-in-law slapped her in front of the village, but no one knew that the same woman would one day rule them all. From shame to glory, her silence shook mountains, and what happened next left the entire village in tears. Watch till the end. This story will haunt your heart. When Lemba first stepped into Moru village, she did so with quiet footsteps and lowered eyes. The village was known for its pride, in their traditions, their power, and their voices. Lemba, however, came with no riches, no ornaments, just a soft spirit and a humble heart. She had married Olumo, son of Chief Balo, but even on her wedding day, the whispers in the village called her too plain and too quiet for a home of such name. Olumo himself was gentle, but easily bent, especially in the presence of his elder sister, Adero, who had a tongue like fire and hands that never trembled. Adero ruled the household like a second chief. Every voice fell silent when she walked in. Even Olumo obeyed her without question. To Adero, Lemba was nothing more than a charity case. She mocked her constantly, never missing a chance to remind everyone that Lemba came from a clan where even goats walk with shame. Lemba never replied. She simply bowed, turned, and continued her chores. Whether it was sweeping, washing, or pounding yam, she did it without complaint. When food was scarce, she gave her portion to Olumo, pretending she wasn't hungry. Makena, the other sister-in-law, was no less cruel. She wore flashy colours, thick gold bangles that clanged when she moved, and every word from her mouth was either mockery or insult. She laughed loudly at Lemba's simple clothes, her plain hair, her quiet ways. "You bring no dowry, no cattle, and still you sit among us?" she would say with a smirk, loud enough for everyone to hear. But Lemba never fought back. She kept her eyes low and her spirit steady. The people of Moru watched silently. Some pitied her, others just waited for her to break. But Lemba did not break. Every morning, she woke before the sun. She swept the compound clean, prepared meals, and served them with bowed head. She took care of Olumo, even when he failed to stand up for her. She smiled through the pain, through the hunger, through the shame. Inside, though, she carried a fire, a quiet one. It didn't scream or burn, it waited. While Adero boasted of her strength and Makena paraded her beauty, Lemba worked with patience, with care, with silence. She was ignored, insulted, and slapped with words every day, but she kept moving. What no one knew, not even Olumo, was that Lemba had not come to beg for a place in Moru. She had come to plant something deeper, something time would reveal. And while others laughed, mocked, and ruled with pride, Lemba listened. She watched. She learned. Every insult became a lesson. Every cruel word became a step. They thought they had married a servant, but the one they mocked would soon become the one they would follow. The Yam Harvest Festival in Moru was a grand celebration. Colours, drums, and laughter filling the air. Women danced in bright fabrics, men beat drums with power, and children ran with painted faces. Lemba, as always, stayed at the edges. She didn't seek attention. Her steps were soft, her hands moved like wind over water, and her eyes stayed down. But even in her quiet, she carried something that made her shine. She didn't dance to impress. She danced like the earth had taught her. Among the guests was a wealthy merchant, Chief Nwambu, known for trading gold and silk across distant lands. As he watched the dancers, his eyes settled on Lemba. Her quiet grace struck him. "Who is that woman?" he asked one of the elders. "That one walks like royalty, not a common village wife." Adero heard the words. Her heart boiled. The same Lemba she mocked, called worthless, now being praised in front of chiefs and guests. Her pride couldn't take it. She stood up, her eyes locked on Lemba like fire ready to burn. Without a word, she marched across the square. Drums slowed, conversations stopped, and then, in the middle of the crowd, before elders, strangers, and her own family, Adero raised her hand and slapped Lemba, so hard the sound echoed through the square. "She is nothing," Adero shouted. "Just a low-born servant who got lucky with my brother. Don't be fooled by her silence." The crowd gasped. Children froze. Even the drummers lowered their hands. Chief Nwambu stood still, his face unreadable. Lemba didn't move. Her cheek burned, her ears rang, but her eyes stayed still. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She looked at Adero once, then lowered her eyes again, and quietly, with calm steps, she turned and walked away. No one stopped her. No one dared. Adero stood breathing hard, chest rising with rage, but the victory she thought she had wasn't there. Instead of cheers, she heard murmurs. Elders exchanged looks. Women whispered behind their hands. Some shook their heads slowly. She went too far. Why hit her in front of the chief? That girl didn't even say a word back. Lemba returned to the compound alone. Her cheek was red, her heart heavy, but her back was straight. She washed her hands, fed the goats, cooked yam for the evening, as if nothing had happened. But the village had changed. They had seen something different in her. Not weakness, not fear, but control. And Adero, though she stood tall in the square, walked home feeling smaller than ever before. In silence, Lemba had shaken the village. And Adero, for the first time, began to lose the very power she once held with just her voice. That same night, while the village buzzed with talk of the slap and Lemba's silence, Makena sat quietly by the clay stove in the family compound. The flames flickered on her face, casting long shadows across the walls. She stared into the fire and whispered to herself, "Not everything that burns turns to ash." Her words were soft, but her thoughts ran deep. Makena had always played the loud, flashy one. Gold bangles, bright fabrics, loud laughter. It was all a mask. While Adero ruled the household with noise and control, Makena had been doing something different, something quiet, something powerful. In secret, she had been spending her nights with Elder Kunu, the village's old librarian. While others slept, Makena read scrolls by oil lamp. She listened to the stories of travelers passing through, studied the stars in silence, and learned how power moved, not just with fists or words, but with knowledge. She had watched Lemba closely since her arrival. At first, she had mocked her like the others, but something about Lemba's silence began to bother her, not in a bad way, but in a way that made her curious. Lemba never fought back, never argued, but there was no fear in her, only control, grace, and something unbreakable behind her quiet eyes. Makena started paying more attention. She noticed how Lemba never forgot a single task, how she cared for others without being asked, how she moved through pain without bitterness. The slap from Adero had shocked everyone, but not Lemba. She had expected it, and yet she hadn't broken. That strength, that discipline, left a mark on Makena. Adero shouted and slapped to keep control, but Lemba, she didn't need to shout. She simply stood tall in her silence, and somehow the village had started to notice. Makena remembered a line from one of Elder Kunu's scrolls. The strongest river is not the loudest, but the one that shapes mountains over time. Lemba was that river, and Makena, for the first time, began to feel ashamed of her own mockery. That night, Makena stayed awake longer than usual. She sat by the fire, thinking of all the knowledge she had gathered, all the secrets she knew, and all the times she had watched in silence while Adero tore others down. Now, she saw clearly. Adero's power was crumbling, and Lemba, the one they all dismissed, was rising. Makena didn't speak to anyone about it. She didn't rush to defend Lemba or confront Adero. She just watched, listened, learned, because something in her was changing too. Makena had lived in noise. Now she had found strength in quiet, and for the first time, she began to see her future not as Adero's shadow, but as her own woman, walking beside someone like Lemba, not against her. 3 moons had passed since the Yam Harvest Festival, and the village of Moru had settled back into its rhythm of trade, prayer, and gossip. But peace shattered like clay when the sacred beads of Moru disappeared. These were no ordinary beads. They had been passed down through 9 generations, kept in the chief's hut under strict watch. Their loss meant more than dishonor. It meant the village had lost its protection, its spirit, its pride. Fear swept through Moru like wildfire. The council of elders gathered in urgency. Rumors flew. Eyes turned to the house of Chief Barlow, the only house that had recently welcomed someone new. Adero's voice rose above the murmurs. "Search Lemba's room," she shouted. "She's cursed. A stranger who brought bad luck." The guards moved swiftly. They turned over Lemba's modest sleeping space. They pulled aside her mat, and there, lying beneath it, were the sacred beads. Gasps burst from the crowd. Cries of betrayal. Children wept. Lemba was seized and dragged to the council square, her wrists tied. Adero marched beside her with a smug look, certain her words had been proven true. The villagers gathered, their faces filled with anger and confusion. Lemba knelt in the red dust, her head bowed. She said nothing, even as people pointed and whispered. Adero raised her hand to speak again, but a firm voice cut through the noise. Let her speak. It was Elder Kunu. He stepped forward slowly, his eyes calm but sharp. Every voice deserves to be heard before judgment, he said, then turned to Lemba. Speak, child. Lemba raised her face, calm and steady. Her voice did not tremble. I saw Makina drop them days ago near the compound. She was rushing to take them to the shrine. I picked them up and hid them, not to steal, but to protect them. I feared Adero would break them. She had been angry. I did not want the beads harmed. Silence fell. All eyes turned to Makina. Her face was frozen. She searched her memory, heart pounding. And then she remembered. It was true. She had been hurrying, distracted, carrying the beads to prepare for a ritual. She had tripped. The beads had slipped from her pouch. In the panic of the day, she had forgotten all about it. Makina stepped forward slowly, her voice barely a whisper. She tells the truth. A wave of shock moved through the crowd. Adero's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Elder Kunu looked around, then back at Lemba. This woman speaks with fire and calm, he said. She acted not with pride, but with wisdom. She sees more than we do. The council murmured in agreement. The ropes around Lemba's wrists were untied. She stood, still silent, but taller now. The villagers looked at her differently, not as a stranger, not as a servant, but as someone worth listening to. The news spread across Moru like thunder in a dry sky. Elder Kunu had spoken. A test would be held in 7 days to choose the next leader of Moru, not by blood or name, but by wisdom. The challenge, to solve the ancient riddle of the dry river, a riddle older than most elders, one that had shamed scholars and silenced travelers for generations. The village buzzed with excitement and disbelief. The riddle of the dry river was no simple task. It spoke of a river that once fed the land, but had disappeared without a trace. The one who could explain its truth and meaning, and offer a solution, would earn not just respect, but leadership. In the gathering at the council square, Elder Kunu made the announcement. The path to Moru's future lies not in strength, but in thought. In 7 days, we choose not the loudest, but the wisest. Adero stood tall in the crowd, arms crossed, laughter escaping her lips. So, we waste time with foolish games now. Who dares to try this riddle? A servant? Her eyes burned toward Lemba, then rolled at the idea. A hush fell over the square. That's when Makina stepped forward, her voice calm, but sure. I will take the challenge, she said. There was no mockery in her eyes, only quiet fire. Gasps rippled through the villagers. Makina, who had been quiet in the shadow of her sister, was now rising. Before the crowd could catch its breath, another voice followed. And so will I, Lemba said, stepping beside her. The silence cracked open. Mouths dropped. People stood still, unsure if they had heard correctly. Lemba, the same woman who had been slapped, blamed, accused. Adero scoffed. This is madness. A library girl and a lowland wife. But no one laughed. Not this time. The council remained quiet. Elder Kunu nodded slowly, watching both women with eyes like a hawk in the wind. Very well, he said. Let Moru see what rises from humility and hunger for truth. 7 days from now, both of you shall return, and the one who answers true shall lead. The crowd erupted, not with anger, but with curiosity. For the first time, people whispered not just about Adero's control, but about new possibility. 2 women, different in fire and form, now stood as challengers. One, born of books and question, the other shaped by silence and storms. As the villagers scattered back to their homes, the air was no longer heavy with judgment. It was electric with suspense. And deep inside her heart, Makina knew this wasn't just a test of minds, it was a test of spirit. And Lemba, she didn't speak again that day, but the way she walked away, calm and straight-backed, told Moru one thing clearly. The forgotten goat from a forgotten land had finally stepped into the center of the field. As the days ticked closer to the test, the village of Moru hummed with anticipation. But behind closed doors, Adero's anger burned hotter than ever. She couldn't stand the idea that 2 women, especially Lemba, the lowland stranger, were challenging her hold on power. So, she began scheming in the shadows. She approached the riddle keeper, offering gold and promises, hoping to buy the answers or at least sabotage the test. When that failed, she turned darker, slipping poison into Lemba's evening porridge, hoping to weaken her before the big day. But neither trick worked. Lemba's spirit stayed strong, her body steady. Meanwhile, Makina surprised everyone. especially Adero, by quietly spending her nights not with gossip or lies, but with Lemba. The two sat together under the soft glow of a flickering oil lamp, papers spread out, whispering over cryptic clues and ancient puzzles. They questioned everything, symbols on the riddle scroll, tales from travelers, even stars above Moru. At first, their words were cautious, careful, like strangers learning to trust. But slowly, that coldness melted. A bond grew, a sisterhood forged not by blood, but by respect and shared struggle. One quiet evening, as they folded a worn map, Makena looked up with gentle eyes and said, "You are the sister I never had." It was simple, but powerful. Lemba's tired face brightened with a soft smile, the first genuine warmth since her arrival. "You will be the leader Moru needs," Lemba replied, her voice steady with conviction. Unbeknownst to them, destiny was already weaving its threads tighter. The village's old secrets, the test, and the hidden past of Makena were all coming to a head. What no one yet knew was that Makena's own story held surprises, secrets tied to Moru's future that could change everything. As the night deepened, the two women sat together, ready to face whatever the coming days would bring. In their unity, Moru's hope found a new spark. The day of the trial dawned bright over Moru, and the village gathered around the base of the Hill of Voices. The hill was steep and rocky, known for the strange sounds the wind made as it passed through the stones, whispers the ancestors were said to send to those brave enough to listen. The trial was not just about strength, but heart and mind. Lemba and Makena stood side by side, ready. Their first challenge was the climb itself. The Hill of Voices tested patience and courage. Lemba moved slowly, steady and careful, listening to the faint murmurs carried by the wind. She didn't rush. She felt the whispers in her soul. Makena, confident but thoughtful, helped steady her steps, their trust in each other growing with every careful move. Next came the fire maze, a twisting path marked by flickering flames and burning embers. The heat was fierce, and many had failed before. Makena's sharp mind quickly found the safe path, eyes clear and focused, while Lemba's calm patience kept her from panic. Step by step, they moved through the maze, their strengths different but equal. The final test was the ancient drums, a series of rhythms that told stories from Moru's past. They had to listen and decipher the meaning hidden in the beats. Makena's clarity helped her understand the patterns, while Lemba's quiet strength allowed her to feel the emotions behind the sound. Together, they pieced the story together, unlocking the message of the ancestors. Down below, Adero watched, her face twisted with rage and disbelief. She spat curses, furious that these two women were succeeding where she had ruled so long. But her anger could not stop the trial. When Lemba and Makena returned, weary but unbroken, the crowd fell silent. Only two had completed the test. The two women who had once been doubted, mocked, and pushed aside. Elder Kunu stepped forward, his eyes shining with pride and wisdom. "Both are worthy," he declared, "but only one can lead." The village held its breath, caught between awe and suspense. Moru had never seen such a challenge, nor such courage. The path to leadership had never been clearer, but the choice would change everything. The night of the festival of the Moonlight Tree arrived. The sacred tree stood tall in the center of Moru, its silver leaves glowing under the full moon, casting a soft light over the entire village. People gathered from every corner, dressed in their finest clothes, their faces filled with curiosity and excitement. Tonight, they would witness something Moru had never seen before. Two women, both strong and wise, standing before them for the final test. A hush fell as Elder Kunu stepped forward. His voice was calm but firm. "Each of you will speak for 7 breaths. No more. Let your truth be your guide." Makena stepped forward first. Her eyes scanned the crowd. Her voice was smooth and steady. "Our village must grow. The world beyond the hills is changing. We need knowledge. We must build bridges, read the stars, and shape the future with wisdom." She paused just as her 7th breath ended. Her words echoed like wind through leaves, thoughtful and sharp. Then, it was Lemba's turn. She stood in silence for a heartbeat longer. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes did not waver. When she began to speak, her voice was soft, but carried a strength that made the night air still. "I came here with nothing. I was called names. I was slapped here, in front of all of you." She looked around slowly, meeting the eyes of those who had laughed and stayed silent. "But I did not shout. I did not strike back. I am still standing, not to take power, not to prove anything, but to serve, to bring healing where there is hurt, to unite where there is pride." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. She lowered her eyes and stepped back, her 7 breaths complete. There was silence. Then, a sound, a single clap, then another. Then, suddenly, the entire square erupted. People shouted, cried, clapped, cheered. Some elders stood in awe, others wiped tears from their eyes. Even a few who once mocked Lemba now looked at her with respect. Makina watched it all with a soft smile. She walked over to Lemba, took her hand, and raised it gently. That night, under the glowing moonlight tree, Moru saw not just a speech, but the heart of a true leader, and the people felt it in their bones. The night was still, the moonlight casting a silver glow over the faces of everyone gathered. The cheers had just started to fade when Makina took a step forward. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held something deeper: clarity, peace, and purpose. She stood before the council, before the entire village, and slowly reached up to her shoulder. There, across her chest, lay the ceremonial sash, the bright woven cloth that symbolized leadership, honor, and the future of Moru. Without a word, she removed it. The crowd gasped. No one moved. Even the wind seemed to pause. Makina turned to Lemba, who stood a few steps behind, still recovering from the roaring applause. Her hands were at her sides, her head slightly bowed, not in defeat, but in humility. Makina stepped closer, gently placed the sash across Lemba's shoulder, and adjusted it so it sat perfectly on her. Then she said, in a steady voice, "She gave us hope, even when we gave her pain. Let her lead." A silence fell over the gathering. The elders looked at each other. Adero stood frozen among the crowd, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. Even the children, who had been giggling and whispering, now stood quietly, sensing something powerful had just happened. Makina's words echoed in the hearts of the people. They remembered Lemba's silence when insulted, her calm when accused, her strength during the trials, and her words under the moonlight tree. One by one, the council members stood and bowed their heads in respect, not to Makina, but to Lemba. Then, the chief elder stepped forward and lifted Lemba's hand high in the air. "By the will of the people and the wisdom of the ancestors," he declared, "Lemba is the new leader of Moru, the first woman to hold this sacred role." A thunder of cheers followed. Some villagers cried, some clapped until their hands hurt. Women hugged each other, men nodded with respect. A few even knelt. Lemba looked stunned, her lips parted in disbelief. She slowly turned toward Makina, who gave her a small, proud smile, a silent message that said, "You were always." Lemba raised her hand gently, signaling the crowd to quiet. Her voice was soft but firm. "I accept not to rule, but to serve, to lift, not to crush, to listen, even in silence." And with that, a new chapter began for Moru, one born not from pride or power, but from sacrifice, unity, and quiet strength. The winds of time swept through Moru, carrying away the whispers of the past. Adero, once loud and proud, vanished like smoke. Some said she ran far away to the shadow hills where no names were spoken. Others believed she lived quietly among goats, no longer with servants or followers, her pride broken and her voice silenced, but no one truly knew. Her name became nothing more than a warning story told to children of what happens when bitterness rules the heart. In the heart of Moru, change bloomed. Makina, once fiery and determined, chose a different path. She didn't chase the crown. Instead, she became the head of the learning hall, guiding young minds, keeping scrolls safe, and mapping stars just like she used to with Elder Kunu. Her lessons were sharp, but full of warmth. She taught children not only to read, but to think, to question, and to dream. She built a new wing to the learning hall and named it after Lemba. Olumo, once quiet and observant, rose beside Lemba as her most trusted advisor. His eyes missed nothing, and his words were few but wise. The two shared plans, strategies, and many silences that needed no words. And Lemba, oh Lemba, the girl who once stood silently while the crowd booed her, the girl who knelt as they accused her falsely, the same girl whose hands once scrubbed floors and whose meals were filled with whispers. That girl now wore the robe of leadership, walked through the village with calm footsteps, and listened to her people with her heart wide open. She became the mother of Moru. She led them through years of struggle, when the rivers dried, when the storms raged, And even when hunger came knocking, but she never wavered. Her voice remained steady. Her decisions were fair. She healed divisions, forgave those who once mocked her, and gave the voiceless a seat at the circle. Children ran to her, elders leaned on her, traders greeted her with pride, farmers blessed her name. Even her greatest critics could not deny Lemba had become the soul of the village. And as time passed, and the village grew wiser and stronger under her care, they chose to honor her in stone. At the edge of Moru, right by the main gate where every traveler entered, they built a statue. It stood tall and graceful, just like her. She was sculpted with her eyes looking forward, not down, her hands open, not clenched in power, but in welcome. And beneath the statue, carved deep into the stone, were the words every child now learns. The one they slapped became the one they bowed to. That was Lemba's story, a story not of revenge, but of rising, not of noise, but of quiet power, not of hate, but of healing. And in every corner of Moru, her name lived on, not just in stone, but in the hearts of all. If this story touched your heart, then pause for a moment. Think of how many Lembas live around us today, silenced, slapped by life, accused for crimes they didn't commit, called worthless, called cursed, but deep inside, they carry the strength to lead, to rise, to heal. Let this story remind us that every humble soul, every quiet fighter, every broken heart has the power to become something greater. Lemba did not seek revenge. She chose wisdom. She chose peace. And in return, life gave her something no one could take: respect. Maybe you have been slapped by the world too, mocked, rejected, forgotten. But listen closely. Your story isn't over. Like Lemba, your pain might be shaping you into the leader the world needs. Keep walking. Keep believing. One day, they will not just remember your name, they will honor it. So if this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, someone who feels invisible, someone who's losing hope, because maybe, just maybe, this story could change their life. Like this video, if it stirred something inside you, share it with love. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heart-touching stories that light up the soul. Thank you for watching, and remember, the one they slapped might just be the one they bow to tomorrow.